Nick Searcy, it's great to have you on the Making Reagan podcast. I'm playing James A. Baker, Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury, among many other things. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me, Mark. It's an honor to be here, honor to be part of the movie.
Well, you are not only an actor, you are a director, probably a producer as well. You've just directed a film that I know of. I know you directed a film last year, I believe, called Gosnell. And yet you're playing James A. Baker, one of the smoothest political operatives known to man, who I've had the chance to meet, by the way, and I had a great time with him. What has this experience been like on the set of Reagan?
Well, it's really interesting to play Baker because he really wasn't a Reagan, originator from the beginning. He sort of is. He's been in politics a long time, Republican politics, but he was, he was on Ford's side. After Reagan, he was on Bush's side. He's sort of a kind of guy that's been involved in many different roles within politics. So it's interesting. He's kind of a guy that was hired for his abilities and his reputation, and not necessarily because he was loyal from the beginning. So that's kind of an interesting take on it.
So he wasn't a Reaganite.
Right.
But maybe sometimes it's good to have a person on your team that's not drinking the Kool-Aid.
Yes, I think that's true, and I think that even Baker himself in his book, he talks about that, about how that in some ways he wishes he'd stayed with Reagan longer into his second term, because it might have he might have been able to sort of avoid some of the pitfalls that happened in Reagan's second term, like Iran-Contra and the other things.
How did you prepare for this role?
Well, I read his book, and I, watched a lot of interviews with Mr. Baker and that sort of thing. And honestly, I'd sort of been doing some research on Reagan anyway because of the documentary I've been making. There's a big section in it about Reagan, so it was not material that was totally unfamiliar to me. And I've always been a big fan of Reagan anyway. So,
obviously, this movie has political issues. I'll never forget, before we had the good fortune to work with Sean McNamara, the director on this picture was going to be John Avildsen, who directed Rocky.
Oh, wow.
And John passed away very suddenly, fairly suddenly, with cancer. But I recall him telling me, he said, Mark, this movie is not really about politics. Rocky was not about boxing. Boxing happened to be the backdrop of the story, and the same with this movie. And I always thought, that's pretty sharp. But you clearly are a person that enjoys politics. You tweet about it. You've been involved in films and TV projects over the years. What interests you about politics?
Well, I guess I come from a family that was always interested in politics. My father was, ran for some local offices, so it was sort of something that was always kind of part of our lives, and I kind of forgot about it in my 20s and 30s because I was trying to build an acting career and I didn't have time to think about it. But once my daughter was born, I got married and my daughter was born, then I started to look at the world again, and see what's kind of going wrong and how can I what do I need to do to try to make her life better. So I got back some interest in it then, and I kind of enjoy the give and take of it, and the sort of enjoy the arguments. I like sharpening what I think by listening to what the other side thinks, and I think it's an important conversation, and I really think more people need to be involved. There's a lot of people in this country that don't pay enough attention to politics, and I think that's part of the problem. That's part of why we have a country that's so divided right now, is because we have about 50% of the country that's not really participating, and they need to pay attention. And of course, I want them to be on the right side of things, but even if they're not, I think they have to get involved and pay attention and make a choice.
And what do you take away from James Baker vis-a-vis politics and his sort of? I don't see him as an ideologue. I think he's more of a pragmatist. What did you learn from this experience of studying about him?
Yeah, I mean, from reading his book, he doesn't even really describe himself as necessarily a conservative, like a hardline conservative. He's a moderate. He's a deal maker, and he's a kind of person who, his philosophy is, let's get as far as we can. Let's move the ball forward as much as we can to get as much of the policy that we desire, and take that deal and move on and try to get more the next time. And in some ways, I think he would be more like, let's just say he's probably more on the Bush side of things than the Trump side of things,
or the Reagan side, maybe.
Or the Reagan side, yeah. I mean, because Reagan was a very philosophical conservative, and he came by that honestly. That's one of the things I love about the movie, is that you show him going through his journey. Because he started out, as he said, as a Democrat, and famously said, "The Democrats left me." And as president of the Screen Actors Guild and all that, he learned how he felt by working in the world and experiencing it. And that's why he believed so strongly in what he believed by the end.
And in terms of your own evolution, where did you grow up, by the way?
Cullowhee, North Carolina, a little town near Asheville in the mountains of North Carolina.
But now, when you grew up, even if you were a conservative, you were a Democrat, right?
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, like I said, when I was a kid, my father was a Republican. And in the mountains of North Carolina at that time, most people were Democrats.
Right.
Most people were, not Goldwater, not Eisenhower even. Most people were Democrats. And so my father always ran for office in Jackson County, North Carolina, where it was 7-2 Republican to Democrat. And he never won an election because he was outnumbered, but he got close a number of times, and so.
What was he running for?
Like board of county commissioners and school board and that sort of thing. And he actually did work in politics when the county commissioners got a majority on the board, and they hired my father to be the county accountant. And so he did work at the courthouse for a little while during my childhood.
What attracted him to politics, do you think? What was it?
I believe that he was philosophically a conservative, and he believed in a lot of the same things Reagan did, even before there was Reagan. I mean, he was for lower taxes. He didn't want the county. I remember there was a big fight about building this airport in Jackson County back then, and it was basically an airport that nobody could use except for rich people that had an airplane. And my father was sort of really fighting against that, and that's what he ran on, was that, this is a big waste of money, and this is not something the county should be doing, is building a helipad for the rich, or whatever.
So it was really local issues.
Yeah, very local issues. And he came close on that election, but he ultimately lost, and they built that airport, and of course it's still there, and it's unusable by anybody who's not.
The rich are still using it.
Right.
Well, how do you get from North Carolina to Hollywood?
I always tell the joke that a lot of my family were preachers, and I used to go to all the tent revivals and the gospel sings, and I'd see them up on stage, and I think I wanted to be a preacher. But then after I started doing theater in high school, I realized that it was the being up on stage part that I was really attracted to. So I just always gravitated towards doing plays from the time I was in grade school, and I wound up doing a few productions of local theater at the university in the town I grew up in, and that kind of hooked me on it. And so I just, I knew I wanted to be an actor from the time I was 12. No actors in my family. Nobody knew what the hell I was talking about. But I just, after high school, I applied to the North Carolina School of the Arts, the acting program, and I went there for a little while, and it was just a path I was on from the time I was 12. That's what I wanted to do. I don't know why.
What was your big break?
I guess probably the big break was Fried Green Tomatoes in a way, but that actually only came about because I had been in New York for 7 years doing theater, and then my wife got pregnant, and we moved back down to North Carolina to have the baby, and so by then the movies were casting locally for little roles. So I got a pretty good role in Days of Thunder. I had a little part in that, a little part in Prince of Tides and all this. And so when Fried Green Tomatoes came to town, it was the same casting director who did Days of Thunder. So they remembered me and they brought me in for a small part. And John Avnet, he thought I looked mean and stupid, so he read me for the bad guy. And so I had to audition for him a number of times, and then he finally gave me the part. So that was a big enough part that I could, and the movie did well, so I could tell
pretty
people.
Substantial role.
Yeah, it was a good role. I was the bad guy, so it was easy to explain to people who I was. And I basically didn't have any representation in LA at that time, but a friend of mine introduced me to a manager, and I cold called her and said, go see this movie. If you want to represent me, let me know. And she called me back in about a week and said, yeah, I'll take you on.
Wow.
So that was it. And then we moved to LA.
And how many years ago was that? Was this 89?
That movie came out in 92? 91.
Yeah. And since then, you've had so many different roles. Obviously, Justified. Well, I guess Justified would that be the one that people know you the best for?
Probably lately, yeah. Justified, and people who saw Shape of Water, maybe that was a pretty big movie. Castaway. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but Justified's the one they know, especially now that I'm old. I mean, people see me now from Fried Green Tomatoes and they go, "Holy cow, that was you! Oh my God, you had hair."
But you worked steadily. I mean, that's not nothing, as they say, right?
I've been very fortunate. I have worked steadily. I've been able to make a living at it, which is really, from the beginning, that's what I wanted to do. I mean, my wife and I were both actors in New York, both sort of struggling, and then, when we moved to North Carolina, and after Fried Green Tomatoes, I started working more consistently, and I was gone a lot, and it was hard on my wife, and we got in a fight, and I said, "I'm sorry, honey, I'm sorry I'm working so much, but, this is the life of an actor, you knew that going in." She said, "I didn't think you were ever going to work."
Great.
So, but it's worked out. I mean, we've been together 34 years, and I've been able to make a living and not do anything other than act for all that time, so.
Share with the listener the sort of feast to famine nature of what you do. I think what we all do, but especially for an actor, in some ways you have less control because you don't know what's coming your way, right? You wake up one day and all of a sudden you have an offer. What is that like, and how do you navigate, how do you figure out how to live that lifestyle?
Well, I mean, I always say, I'm glad I really didn't make it into my 30s and I was married with a kid, because then it kind of made me more responsible. And it made me not trust the money. I mean, I think if I had been sort of really doing well in my 20s when I was single, I would have blown it all. But, and Leslie, my wife, is very frugal as well. And so we just kind of you
live the same lifestyle no matter what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, we built a house. I mean, we did the stuff that you need to do, but we didn't go crazy. And by that time, I knew people that, it had some success and had lost it, had kind of gone broke. So it made me really wary of it, And so I just think that, I was lucky enough to have some wealth when I was mature enough to know how to handle it. And yeah, there have been stretches, even through that 30 years, there was a stretch where I didn't work for like 15 months. And you kind of, maybe I can refinance the house. I mean, you're starting to think about things like that. And so, there have always been those times. I mean, even after Justified, even just recently, I mean, it was, there were a few years there where I was not doing as well as I used to because of my big mouth about politics. But, you get by and you figure it out. And thankfully, we've been able to, sort of make sure that we're not going to wind up destitute.
And when did you expand to directing? Did you direct some Justified?
I never did. I did a movie. The first movie I directed was in 1995. A friend of mine and he wrote a script, and I said, "This is really good. Let's raise the money." And we just shot this movie ourselves. And I had actually been making short films in college, just sort of little Super 8 things and splicing them together, just, joke films and stuff that was for fun, and I kind of always wanted to do that. I've always been had aspirations to be a director. So in '96 we made that movie, and it won a few film festivals, and it did pretty well, but it was never released. We never really got going with it. So, and it was so much work at that time, I just went, I want to go back to that little job I had where I sat in a trailer and I had 4 or 5 lines and went to see what was at the craft service table. Just directing is just you got to be there every minute, and every decision is yours. Yeah. So.
Producing is one thing, directing is a whole other thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then, after when Gosnell came up, they were looking for a director, and I recommended a couple of people. And then when they came back to me, said, "Do you know anybody else?" I said, "Well, I directed this movie. You want to look at it?" And so I gave them the movie that I directed in '96, and they asked me if I wanted to direct Gosnell.
And Gosnell, tell the listener about Gosnell. What was it about?
It's a true story about a doctor in Philadelphia named Kermit Gosnell who was convicted of murder in 2013 for murdering infants after they were born. He ran a really filthy, uninspected women's clinic in Philadelphia. It went uninspected for 17 years. Women died there that he kind of mistreated, and he developed this system of delivering babies and then doing the abortion after they were out. He did that because it was easier and it increased his volume, and it was a really, really sordid thing. And interesting, I mean, not to tell the whole movie, but he was, they found out what he was doing because the police went in to investigate a drug deal, because he had also been writing illegal prescriptions so that people could sell OxyContin on the street. So in searching for the drugs, they found out the conditions in his clinic, and then it turned into a murder trial.
And you directed this, and you appeared in it as well, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I played his attorney. I always play the bad guy if I can. It's more fun.
So back in the director chair, the movie did some business at the box office. It was controversial. Didn't that doctor also deliver Will Smith?
Oh, I don't know. About
that doctor delivered Will Smith.
Huh. I didn't know that.
Odd, true but odd Hollywood stories.
We should have put that in the movie. I didn't know.
Yeah, a cameo by young Will Smith.
Right.
But it was controversial, of course, at the time. And you do find yourself every once in a while in the middle of controversy. Is it primarily on social media? Is that where you express yourself politically?
Well, that, and also, I mean, I think that I'm a free speech guy. I think that all points of view should be, you should be able to express yourself as an artist in whatever way you choose. And this idea that Hollywood is just sort of a monolithic town that is only for leftists, I think is the wrong way to go about it. I don't want to stop anybody on the left side from making their films, but I don't think I should be stopped. I don't think I should be discriminated against because I have a different opinion. And I wind up I just made another film that I didn't direct, but I produced and commissioned to do a documentary about the importance of the Bible in the founding of America. To me, that's not really a controversial issue, but it seems to be, because a lot of the people on the left in Hollywood think that's a subject that is not worth telling or not worth speaking about. So I wind up, I look at it like I think I'm being perfectly reasonable, and everybody else that's attacking me is acting like an idiot.
Well, I love the fact that on a movie like this, I most of the time have no idea where the talent stands. We're all working together. We're professionals. We don't.
Right.
And I think I probably knew about you because you're out there outspoken. But like we did a podcast with Mark Moses earlier with Leslie Ann Down. I had no idea. It's fascinating to learn on the set that they have very different political views.
Sure.
And everybody's very friendly and professional. And it seems like in the real world, people have learned to have differences. And yet our culture seems to be at this place now where, at least in social media, people are going nuts, and I can't be your friend anymore, and you can't be my friend anymore. I had a friend who lost a guy who was the best groomsman in his wedding because of their political difference. So he still can't figure out what's going on. So what's changing, or are we changing?
My theory on that is that I think the reason that it's changing is that finally I think conservatives are getting not unafraid to talk back. I mean, I have been experiencing this. I don't talk politics at work, and I never have, but even as far back as 2004, when Bush was reelected in 2004, I was on a show that year, and we had a table read the next day, and I mean the hatred and devastation that was coming from the actors on that show. They could not bear the fact that they were so sure that they were going to win, and so I think a lot of it is just like they're fine with our opinion as long as we don't win. But if we win and we're sort of in the majority in that way, it becomes a situation, because I think that the left side believes that we're evil. It's not just a matter of opinion to them. They think that we're evil.
Now, do you think they're evil?
I think that they're wrong. I think that they have I think that their philosophy is based on leftism, which, whether they know it or not, and I think some of them are actually hardcore leftists, and I think some of them are just kind of going along. And that's kind of the people that I try to go after, is the people that could be swayed. But I don't necessarily think the people themselves are evil, but I do think Marxism is evil. I do think leftism is evil.
So you differentiate the ideas from the people.
Yeah. And see, that's not a hard concept for, I think, someone that comes from a Christian background. You know, you love the sinner but hate the sin. That old thing, that old saw about that. But that's true. I mean, it's not necessarily. There's an interview in my movie with Andrew Young, the Ambassador Andrew Young, who served with Jimmy Carter, not a conservative.
Former mayor of Atlanta,
not a conservative Democrat. But Andrew Young talks about how he grew up near white supremacists, and his father walked him by them one day, and they were out there saluting Hitler and doing whatever they did. And his father told him, he said, "These people are sick. They have a sickness. You don't hate them. They're sick. You pray for them, and you live your best life. You don't argue with them. You don't fight with them. They're sick, and so they need our prayers." And it's that sort of love that I think people on the left don't necessarily have, because the source of it is not part of their ideology. The source of that kind of love comes from above. It doesn't come from people in the world. And I think that's part of the problem. There's not a possibility for people on the left to forgive you. I don't want to say everybody on the left, but most people on the left, they don't have the capacity to forgive, because that's not part of their ideology.
Because you believe that forgiveness is sort of is it an exclusively Christian concept, or it's primarily a Christian?
I think it's exclusively spiritual. I think it has to come from a place where you believe in a higher power, whether you're Jewish or
Christian. Other religions believe in forgiveness too. So,
yes.
Yeah.
But if you, I think a lot of the Marxist leftist ideology, the communist ideology, obviously, is that there is no God, that the state is the only God, and therefore all authority, everything serves the state. And I think you have to have a belief in some sort of a higher power in order to be able to forgive.
And you mentioned you have a daughter. Mm-hmm. How old is she now?
31.
You're not that old.
I'm that old.
How old are you when you were married exactly?
I'm that old.
12?
I was 12 when we got married.
Right.
Yeah, no, she's 31, and I have a son who's 20.
Mm-hmm. And they've grown up to be productive members of society, in spite of the fact their dad lived in Hollywood?
Yeah, my daughter is, she's very successful right now. She's sold a show to, she's a writer and actress, and she's sold a show to TNT that they're finalizing and getting ready to make the pilot for. And my son is 20, and he's working in the film business here and there. He worked with me on the documentary that I just made, and he's doing some college. He was a good athlete in high school. He went through a period of time where he was playing college sports, but now he's kind of figuring it out. He's kind of like trying things on and seeing what he wants to do.
And what's next? What do you have next on the docket? Have you finished this film that you just talked about, a documentary?
This is it. I quit.
You're quitting after this? Reagan made you decide to get out of the business.
I'm done. I have a couple of things that I've written with a partner that I really want to do. I have a feature film about gospel quartet music in the 60s that I'm really excited about and have some interest in. There's a couple of projects kicking around that, I might be hired to do that I didn't necessarily develop myself, but that I'm interested in. So I'm really hoping to do more on the directing side over the next few years, because I kind of reached that point where I see myself in the movie and I go, oh my God, is that really me? Oh God, I need to get into something else. I'm too old for this.
But there's lots of great characters to play that are older characters, right?
Yeah, and that's, I'm glad this came up. Baker is a great character to play, and I'm hoping that doesn't stop. but I definitely want to spend the next few years of my career as much as I can making these projects that I really care about and that I've invested a lot of my.
Well, this is your episode, so I don't want to be like Charlie Rose and talk too much. But it was like 25% of the time he'd be talking, so I don't want to be that. However, I want to tell you, Nick, that I spent some time with the real James Baker, and what really surprised me, I was not expecting it, was he said that he was with Bush when Reagan called down to ask him to be his vice president nominee. And I said, well, what was the conversation like? And he said, well, Reagan said, can you adopt my position on abortion? Because Bush had been heretofore pro-choice. Mm-hmm. And I thought, of all the things you could ask a potential vice president running mate, you could say, hey, my Middle East policy, the Soviets, all the 55 things you could talk about. Why in the world is he talking about this one issue as kind of a deal breaker? And of course, Bush agreed to switch positions. That surprised me. Does that surprise you?
Not really. I mean, because I think the reason the pro-life issue was so central to Reagan is because of his anti-communism, in a way, because the whole communist philosophy, you have to deny the importance of human life in order to believe in that philosophy, in order to follow it, because the state has to be able to execute people who are enemies of the state. You have to negate that divine aspect of life so that people then become expendable if it's for the greater good, if it's for the collective. So I think that the pro-life issue for Reagan was a spiritual issue, obviously, because he did believe that human life was a gift from God. But that difference is what differentiates us from the communists. And I think once you give that up, once you give that pro-life position up, and you start down the road of like some lives are more important than others, this life doesn't start until this point, 25 weeks, 20 weeks, what are we talking about? Once you get into that argument, it's easier for that to slip away towards all human life is expendable. All human life is a matter of convenience for the state.
But isn't it surprising that he would make that kind of a litmus test?
Well, I think that probably Reagan was smart in that it would be very difficult for you to have an administration where the top of the ticket was pro-life and the vice president was pro-choice. That'd be a hard thing to say
for either party.
And that's why that it's monolithic in the Democratic Party too. You cannot be pro-life and be a Democrat.
It's interesting that Reagan picks Richard Schweiker to be his running mate in '76, who was a Democrat, governor of Pennsylvania, but pro-life, and then picks a very moderate Republican, Bush. It was almost like he sensed that perhaps he was a little bit too right for the country, and he needed to find somebody to kind of give him a little bit of a balance, a little bit of pragmatism there.
Yeah, probably so. And I think that his picking Bush especially was because he wanted to unite the country. I mean, in some ways it makes sense. They're the top two vote getters. Bush came in second. That's a quick way to unify everybody. Everybody at least at the Republican convention. So. And I think that probably Reagan was, Goldwater had lost so badly before because he was seen as such a right-wing ideologue. Reagan probably wanted to avoid that.
Mm-hmm. What was your opinion of Reagan at the time in the 70s, 80s when he was running? What were your thoughts?
This is during the time when I was a college student and I was trying to pursue an acting career, so I wasn't necessarily thinking about politics that much. I remember the first presidential election I voted in was 1980. Because I turned, I was 18 in 77. So I missed the Reagan-Carter election, but I voted for John Anderson in 1980.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Who would you have voted for in 76, do you think? Because Jimmy Carter's a Southerner. Might you have voted for Carter?
I would have voted for Reagan in 76.
You would have?
Yeah, because at that point I was a junior in high school, and I'm sure my parents would have talked me into voting for me.
But then Anderson in 80, you have to explain that one.
Well, Anderson,
third party candidate.
Yeah, was a third party candidate. He was an independent candidate.
He got like 7% of the vote. Or
yeah,
something
he got
that.
Substantial, maybe 5 or 6, I think, something like that. But yeah, I mean, to me at that point, I was what was it? 1980. I was a junior in college. And so there was a lot of political talk going on. That was probably, during that time, I'm being in college, it's the most leftist I've ever been, because I'm listening to all my professors and going, yeah, maybe my dad is a moron, or whatever. And so I was sort of open-minded, but I didn't want to go that far. I didn't want to go to the Democrat side. And I think that for me, Anderson at that time was just like a way of like avoiding making a choice. I didn't want to be the hard right wing or the hard left wing, and Anderson gave me a way out.
And he was a Republican congressman, I think, from Illinois or somewhere. So he would have been like a centrist and moderate Republican.
Yeah, and I've always been attracted to those kind of candidates. I voted for Perot once too.
In '92.
Yeah, the first time he ran, I voted for Perot, and I've always sort of, and I realized looking back, I was always looking for someone who was not necessarily a career politician or not necessarily somebody that came from the outside. I was like a big fan of Herman Cain in 2012. I campaigned for him. But I've always sort of been looking for that because there's something about the inner workings of politics that I just sort of instinctively distrust, probably because I saw some of that with my father. Even in the local politics there, it's like there's a lot going on there. So that they don't want the public to know about. So I wanted somebody to come in from the outside and really, make a difference, do something different,
Well, we're talking about, we're on the set of the film. We just finished some scenes today. You're playing James Baker. You have a particular hair piece that you use to be James Baker, right? And you probably have different characters because you play so many different characters. Mm-hmm. Do you have like different hair pieces you use for different situations and characters?
That one's been very versatile. I've styled it in many different ways. I've had that in a curly perm. I've had it, I've had it slicked down. I've had it in a butch cut. I've used that wig a lot. So.
We need to post some of these pictures on the podcast site so people can see what you're talking about. But so you have the same basic one, and then people style it differently and different characters you're playing.
Yeah.
And, that's what were you as you read his book, and what were you trying to capture through your work in terms of Baker's essence?
Well, I wanted to play that idea of Baker as the deal maker, the sort of moderate deal maker, the guy who was, at least he saw himself as the voice of reason, that he's here to help these help people that maybe were more diametrically opposed come to some middle ground. So just a moderator, a guy who, because like I said in his book, he thinks his philosophy is more about let's get as far as we can, but let's accept the fact that there's going to be some opposition, and we might need to take what we can get and go for more the next time.
Reagan would say half a loaf is better than no loaf.
Right.
So very much in that sort of. And did you any thoughts on his relationship with Mies, with Deaver? There was kind of a troika they had going on. Did you have any observations on that and how you played off of the Mies and Deaver characters here?
Well, it hasn't come up that much just because of the nature of the script. It's not necessarily about Baker's relationships as much as it is Reagan's. But there was some tension between Mies and Baker. I think that we tried to get across with a look or a gesture here and there, because Mies was much more in line with the hardline philosophy of Reagan's camp, and I think he and Baker probably had some times where they were not in agreement on some things. So I try to get that across, even though I probably, would be more in line with Mies than Baker, personally.
Philosophically. Yeah, what I hear sometimes from people in Reagan world is that Baker was very organized. Mies was not as well organized. I probably spent more time with Ed Mies than Baker, but Mies is an extraordinary person. A while back, maybe 6 months ago, I called him up, as I do from time to time, to just get advice or some question about something, and I posed the question to him, and he casually mentioned, "Oh, by the way, I just had a stroke and I'm in the hospital right now."
Oh my goodness!
I'm talking to a guy who's he'd lost half of his whatever, and he still wants to answer my questions. And I said, "General Mies, so I'll call you back." And no. What's your question?
Yeah.
He's really a remarkable person in that he just doesn't. He walks around with two canes, and he goes to these conventions, and he's very committed to still advancing his beliefs at 87. But I mention that because it seems like Nancy Reagan in particular seemed to have a lot of wisdom, and perhaps wisdom, in that she wanted Reagan to be surrounded by not all ideologues that agreed with him, but also people who had a different perspective,
Right.
maybe who are more organizational. What are your thoughts on that? Do you agree with that, or do you think something is lost when you have too many people with too many different points of view in an administration?
I don't think it's good to have everybody being a yes man. I certainly think that it's better to have people that look at things from different sides, and maybe have a different take on things. I think at the end of the day, though, you have to be in a situation where the president, the main man, has to make his decision, and that decision's final, and then everybody has to get on board with that. I think it's not helpful to have people continuing to fight after the decision's been made.
What's your takeaway from Baker and Reagan and just all the things you've learned and studied and immersed yourself in for the film?
I think the thing that I like most about this film, or that I learned just from reading the script, is just what Reagan's journey was and how he got to be who he was, and the material in the script about when he was president of the Screen Actors Guild and the things he went through with that and the battles between the different factions in that union, that really shaped him more than I knew, more than I was expected to. I didn't expect that would be such an important part of the script, but it's a fascinating section, and that's what led him to be who he was as governor of California, and it really shaped him. And being an actor myself, of course, I thought that was really interesting.
And anything on James Baker?
Well, I mean, I have enjoyed reading his book and getting to know him. I think that in many ways Baker is philosophically different than I am personally in his politics. I think I would consider him more of a like I say, a moderate Republican, or a Romney type Republican, or a McCain. And not that that's necessarily a bad thing. That's just sort of the category he seems to fall in for me. And that's definitely that's not my philosophy.
You do have a remarkably similar look, though. Your eyes, your face structure.
Yes, he's a very handsome man.
Well, I didn't say that, but I suppose you could extrapolate if you'd like to go there. But no, I think you just you brought a great look, because that is important. This is a movie after all. This is not a documentary, and we do want it to be entertaining. And it's always challenging to get those looks somewhat similar. I think we did a pretty good job with most all the characters, and of course with Dennis as well. And we had some conversations with other actors for the Reagan role, and it was like some people were going to take a lot of hair and makeup to look like Reagan. Dennis, you pretty much just put him out there.
Yeah.
Put a few
no, he looks great.
Touches on there, and I think similarly for you as well. But it's just been a great pleasure to have you on the set, Nick, and we've had a lot of fun together, cracking jokes, and thank you again for being a part of this.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me. It's an honor. I mean, I told John Sullivan when he'd been telling me about this movie forever, I said, you cannot make that movie without putting me in it. I will not permit it. So he succumbed.
It worked.
Yeah.
It worked.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Nick.
All right. Thanks, Mark.